Okay, so I've talked about Oppenheimer, I've given you my thoughts on that one. Now let's continue the Barbenheimer theme and go into my thoughts on Barbie. This is a complicated review. I'll start by saying I absolutely love this film. I had a great time. It was hilarious. It was really fun. The message is fantastic and something that unfortunately the world absolutely still needs to hear. As I said in my other video, I didn't do the Barbenheimer. I saw this on a separate day and I'm very glad I did that. I do think whilst most people probably will have done that or not by now, it's probably not a great idea in the sense that there's probably just a little bit too much film and a little bit too far apart on the tonal spectrum. I think if you went from Oppenheimer into Barbie without too much of a break, I feel like you'd still be thinking about Oppenheimer and that would be a very, very strange tonal shift into Barbie. But assuming you didn't do that like me, you'll be nice and fresh going into Barbie and ready to have a great time at the cinema. When I left this film, the first thing I thought, which I've not seen anyone else compare it to, but the film that it reminded me of the most in a weird way was actually like the Rocky Horror Show. Not in its sexuality and certainly not in its subject matter, but just in the sense that it's completely absurdist. It's clearly going for that. It definitely knows what it is. This is a film that wears its heart on its sleeve 100%. There is no subtlety here, and that is something I'll come back to later in one of my slightly more negative parts of the film. But yeah, this is a completely wacky film that just goes in places that, you know, even if you've seen the marketing and the trailers, you probably wouldn't expect. I do think it's hilarious that there's probably quite a lot of people who went into this film only having seen the marketing, not perhaps having seen Greta Gerwig's previous films or not really understanding who she is as a filmmaker. That therefore went into this film thinking that this is, you know, maybe like a Marvel-esque big film based on an IP, a property that people know, you know, a toy film, that kind of thing. And obviously that's not something we were ever going to get from Greta Gerwig. And I say that in the absolute most positive way. It is very rare to see a film that deals with such, you know, societal and serious issues whilst also being completely absurd, ridiculous, and frankly hilarious. I do think this is a film like most films these days, unfortunately, that if you've seen all of the marketing, if you've seen all of the trailers, you have unfortunately seen quite a lot of the jokes. Now, that's certainly not a knock on the film because, you know, I understand how the marketing beast works these days, and especially for a film like this where, you know, the coverage of this has been everywhere for the last couple of months now, it was always going to be hard to do that. But I've got to admit, it did take a little bit away for me when I felt that probably the majority of the really funny kind of wisecrack jokes were unfortunately ones I'd already seen in the marketing. Saying that, there's still some absolutely hilarious moments that were saved for the film, and the tone of the film is just wacky, crazy fun from the get-go. Two things that you absolutely cannot deny is that the set design and costuming and all the kind of visual style of this film is incredible. Whilst it's not shot anything like a Wes Anderson film, it has that stylistic value that you just don't see in that many films. It's obviously not going for a real life tone. It's not trying to make anything look real world, apart from the handful of bits in the real world. But because of that, it can really play within the world that it's set, this Barbie land that, if you watch the behind the scenes, they've set really closely on, you know, actual toys and play sets and stuff like that. Even as far as to kind of change the scale on the cars and the houses and stuff so that they're in the same scale as the Barbies would be to the play sets in real life. That attention to detail goes a long way, and it makes the Barbie land feel just like something you really don't see in films anymore, or at least don't see in very many films anymore. It has that old Hollywood, everything's done on a soundstage feel that I think really, really benefits the film. I think this film done by someone else would have definitely risked going into the land of green screen and having a lot of CGI elements in, you know, the Barbie world and the transitions to the real world. Perhaps I'm a bit biased because I've seen some behind the scenes and seen how that was done, but I feel like even if you haven't, you can tell it was done practically. You can tell there's a lot of set work and really good costumes, and it just adds a lot to the film. The other thing that is absolutely undeniable is that every single person in this film is incredible in their role and, you know, knew exactly what the assignment was and did it to a T. It's not a shock to anyone at this point that Margot Robbie is a fantastic actor. She's done a really wide range of films at this point, you know, from comedies to very serious dramas. Clearly she is one of the best acting talents that we have at the moment. And similarly, Ryan Gosling is not exactly short for roles. We've seen him in a lot of different projects, but he absolutely excels here. He actually excels so much that he risks stealing the show from all the other characters. I think the general consensus from people I've spoken to and what I've seen online is that his Ken actually is the best part of the film. And whilst I don't think that's an issue, I do think it's interesting in a film that is about Barbie and, you know, females and women in the real world and the patriarchy and all those societal issues. It is potentially a bit complicated that Ryan Gosling's Ken and the rest of the Kens steal the show a bit. Again, it would be fascinating to see an interview with Greta Gerwig if she is ever asked that question. Was it something that she knew was going to happen? Was it something that she was okay with happening? Or did, unfortunately, Ryan Gosling actually just steal the show in a way that kind of wasn't planned? It certainly doesn't take away from the film, and actually I think if you dig deeper into the themes of the film, the attitudes towards men in the world are also discussed, and it is also something that's looked at, is a bit more nuanced than some of the stupid shit we're seeing online. Look, it was to be expected that you were going to see people that were saying this was anti-men and all that kind of stuff, but if you watch the film and really kind of understand what's being said, that is clearly not the case. I do still just think it's interesting though that the Kens are actually probably the most interesting characters, and I'd just love to know whether that was by design or not. Ryan Gosling's musical number, I'm Just Ken, is probably the best part of this film. It begs the question whether or not this film could have also just been a musical more often than it was, or throughout, because the music was so good, and it's a really fun song, and Ryan Gosling is just fantastic throughout that whole kind of 5-minute scene. All the rest of the supporting characters are really good as well. It's great to see some actors from Sex Education in this. Clearly, that's a big show worldwide. I'm not suggesting it's indie by any means, but to see multiple of the actors from that put straight into this film is just really satisfying to see. Them teaming up Ncuti Gatwa and Emma Mackey together in the film as a Ken and Barbie combination, there's no way that's a coincidence. The director has clearly seen Sex Education, and I just find that really satisfying. And yeah, all the rest of the supporting cast, America Ferrera, everyone is just really, really good in their roles. The only person I probably could have done without in the film is Will Ferrell. I get that there sort of had to be an antagonist in the real world and, another storyline outside of just the Kens taking the patriarchy back to Barbie Land and all that kind of stuff. But I just felt every time Will Ferrell was in the film, it felt like a little bit of a distraction from what we were actually kind of trying to do. And I just didn't really think the Will Ferrell stuff was brilliant. But it's also not a major part of the film. He's reduced to a couple of scenes really where he's in it, so it doesn't really take away too much. I think I touched on the comedy, but this is a laugh out loud funny film almost throughout. Yes, there are some really serious scenes that delve into some of the issues I discussed earlier on, but the film's hit rate of comedy is very high. It keeps going back around to the jokes, and it really works for me. I think the humour was spot on in this film. The only other thing in this film that I potentially didn't love, and this is definitely a complicated one that I've been trying to work out how I feel about, and at the end of the day, it's good that it's asking these questions, of course. But I do feel the film's lack of subtlety does risk at times taking away from the message a little bit. Again, if you've seen Greta Gerwig's other films with Lady Bird or Little Women, they are obviously very different tonally. They're much more serious films, they're much more nuanced, but I feel that tone really helps with the messaging that they're trying to get across. Whereas I feel that message being put across in something that is essentially a comedy for the most part, it just has a tonal imbalance that I feel like sometimes it struggled with. There are some really moving scenes, and there are some scenes that absolutely, hit home and make you think about what it's trying to say. But I think because it's a comedy, they couldn't really sit with these scenes for too long and really dive into them. Again, I'm sure this is intentional. I'm sure this is something that she absolutely was trying to do with this film. I don't think this is an oversight by any means, but I do just think for me personally, a little bit more of a serious dive into some of those issues may have made a bit more of a statement than it actually has. But I also understand that being a Barbie film, this is a very mainstream film that realistically lots and lots and lots of people are going to see. And if the box office numbers are anything to go by, they already have. It looks like Greta Gerwig is quickly on path to become the highest grossing box office female director of all time, and this is going to happen in only a couple of weeks. So it's an incredibly impressive feat. As I've mentioned, the marketing campaign for this film was brilliant. I haven't seen something like it for a long time. But yeah, I feel the film struggles a little bit with some of the messaging in terms of the patriarchy and the oppression of women and stuff like that, where it tells you that's what it's saying, but it doesn't necessarily back that up in the message 100% of the time. But yeah, I'd have to go into a real video essay style thing to kind of explain all of that and my thoughts on all of it, because it is a super complicated topic. And at the end of the day, it's just great to see a film of this nature, about this subject, made and put out by a woman, getting its credit and getting its dues at the box office and just generally being an incredible success. It is absolutely ludicrous that it's 2023 and we've seen this few high-grossing films made by women. And I'd like to make it clear that clearly this is a lack of opportunity, not a lack of quality. So yeah, that was my overall thoughts on Barbie. I thought this was an absolutely fantastic film. It's well worth seeing. It's worth seeing in the cinema. It's been a really fun experience to just see groups of people going in, having a great time. And you'll be downloading the soundtrack as soon as you get home because there's some absolute bangers on it. So that was my review of Barbie. We've now got Barbenheimer in the books. I don't actually know what I'm going to go and see next. I've got Mission Impossible on the list, a few others coming out soon as well. So I look forward to seeing you there.